Good morning, Burwood Church. Glad to be with you here on this fine morning. Who or what are you following at this time? For us in Australia here, it could be COVID in Melbourne, or the footy finals are on, or you could be tracking overseas and watching that little event happening in the United States called the presidential elections. There's many things we could be following. There's Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. We could just go on and on and on. But today, we're looking at a passage from Matthew chapter 8. Now, Jesus has been preaching his heart out all day, and he's shared story after story. He's had a visit from family. He's had a healing, a demon-possessed man. So Jesus has had a full-on day. And now we've come to the end of the day in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 18. And this is what it says. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross to the other side of the lake. So now we've come to the end of the day, and Jesus says to his boys, his disciples, he said, guys, he says, all the crowd around, he says, we've got to go, we've got to have a break. We need to get some rest. Jesus isn't fazed by popularity. He isn't addicted to crowds. He's on purpose and he is on mission. And this is evident right back to his childhood when he says, I must be about my Father's business. And I love what Stephen Covey says in one of his quotes about prioritizing. You have to decide what your highest priorities are and have the courage, pleasantly, smilingly, non-apologetically, to say no to other things. And the way to do that is by having a bigger yes burning inside. Then in verse 19, we have a teacher of the law approaching Jesus, because he'd been listening to Jesus all day. And he said this to Jesus, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Now this is an interesting statement because obviously he has been listening to Jesus, observing, and he's saying there's something about this man that is desirable, that I want to be part of his team. But Jesus goes on to share something very interesting. In verse 20, foxes have dens to live in, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To think that the God of the universe cares for even these creatures, the foxes and the birds of the air, creatures that were considered less important. But the Son of Man, he had nowhere to lay his head. Think about this for a moment. Jesus, who had been the Prince of Heaven, who had the adoration of angels, who created this world and all that is in it, at this very point in time says, I don't have anywhere to lay my head. What an incredible life of sacrifice and service. Did it mean Jesus was penniless? No, but he was homeless at this time. And he was saying to this teacher of the law, do you really know what you're saying here? Let me tell you a story here about my life. In this job that I am in, I do a lot of travelling. I have to sleep in cabins, in tents, away from home a lot. Now, there was one thing that I would take with me regularly. That was my pillow. And the operative word here is was, because that pillow is no longer. Because my pillow was this thin. I like a nice thin pillow. And that pillow was just like a Goldilocks pillow to me. Just right, just the right size, just the right thickness, and just the right softness. And on one trip overseas I took to America and to Mexico, I took that pillow with me because I was going to be away for 4 weeks. Now I wanted some comfortable sleeps at least a number of times in that trip. But to my sad regret, I left it in the hotel in Tuxtla Gutiérrez. And I mourned for that pillow for days, probably even weeks, because from then on I had to have pillows that were too high or too hard or too soft even. And it took me months to find a pillow that I was comfortable with, that I was used to again, that I could feel that I could get an adequate sleep and adequate rest. But imagine Jesus not knowing where he's going to sleep the next night or the next day, sleeping in a different home, a different bed, a different place. In verse 21, we have another disciple approaching Jesus. Now, this disciple had been obviously following Jesus for some time. And he approaches Jesus with this question. And he says to Jesus, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Now, that would seem in all circumstances to be quite reasonable. But Jesus' response was very unusual. In fact, it almost seemed harsh. Let me share it with you in verse 22. It says this, "And Jesus said to him, 'Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead.'" A strange response from Jesus, it would seem. But in the context of the day, it wasn't. Because what the young disciple was actually asking was this. He said, "Can I go back to my father and take care of him, take care of his health until he passes?" Because there was all probability that his father was healthy and well. But Jesus said, "No." He said, "I want you to make a decision now." Another response also that is to be considered here as well is that the young man might have been thinking that, look, I'll go back home to my father, wait there until he dies, and then collect my inheritance. Then I'll come and follow Jesus. But Jesus said, "No, I want you to consider about following me now. Don't put off what you can do now. Our calling will be totally different from the next person. But all Jesus is asking is for us to be faithful to him and to follow him regardless, whatever that uncommon sacrifice looks like." So why follow Jesus? Why follow this man of Galilee? Why follow this Son of Man? Jesus left heaven to come to this world. He gave up all of heaven because in Jesus was a living demonstration of the love of God. And ultimately that demonstration was poured out on the cross for you and me. And in the cross met justice and love and grace and forgiveness. A forgiveness that would release us from our sin and shame and brokenness. And this can be our experience here and now. All these things were met in Jesus at the cross. He humbled himself for you and me so that we can have a life eternal and a life of meaning and purpose here and now. Why is Jesus worth following? Why is Jesus worth following? It's because, as I've just shared, for all that he's done for us. His grace comes with refill after refill after refill. That's my Jesus. And friends, if you've never thought about following Jesus before, or you have halted or stepped back, consider again this call on your life. A call to sacrificial ministry, a sacrificial service. Because looking at the life of Jesus, nothing can be worth more than giving our life to him. And that is why it is worth following Jesus.